Commander Jake Morrison stood outside the massive council chambers with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Through the thick viewing window, he could see the representatives of 40 different alien species arguing like children fighting over toys. The Veltheran were standing on their seats, waving their forearms in angry gestures. The Crix delegates were chittering so loudly that even through the soundproof glass he could hear the buzz of their hive communication. The aquatic Silurians floated in their water tanks, making aggressive bubble patterns that their translators were struggling to interpret. This had been going on for 6 hours straight, and Jake knew it would continue for at least 6 more. He looked down at his datapad and checked the time again. His shift had ended 3 hours ago, but Ambassador Linda Hayes had asked him to stay close in case the council decided to actually vote on something. That seemed unlikely. For the past 4 months, humanity had been trying to help resolve a dispute between the Veltheron Empire and the Crix Collective over mining rights in the Talos asteroid belt. It should have been simple. The asteroid belt had enough mineral wealth for both species to mine profitably without ever coming into conflict. Humanity had surveyed the entire region and created 14 different proposals for fair division based on existing operations and resource needs. Every single proposal had been rejected. The Veltheran wanted the entire belt because their empire had been there first according to their historical records. The Crix wanted the entire belt because their hive had greater resource needs to feed their growing population. Neither side would compromise even slightly. Both sides demanded that humanity choose who was right and enforce that decision with military force. When humanity refused to take sides, both species accused humans of being cowards and poor allies. It made Jake want to punch something, but diplomats did not punch things, so he just stood there and watched the circus continue. A door opened behind him and Captain Daniel Cross walked up carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Jake without saying anything, and they both stood there sipping the bitter station-brewed liquid and staring through the window. Daniel commanded the human battle group currently stationed in orbit around Station Harmony. His ships had been on standby for 7 weeks waiting for the Council to decide if they wanted human military intervention in the Veltheron Creek situation. Every time Daniel requested permission to return his ships to normal patrol duties, the Council extended his deployment. They wanted human warships visible as a deterrent, but they did not actually want humans to do anything. Inside the chamber, Lord Castellan, Thevrix of the Veltheran, was making another dramatic speech about ancient territorial claims and imperial dignity. The translator made his words sound pompous and self-important. The Crix Queen's representative responded with clicking sounds that the translator rendered as accusations of warmongering and resource hoarding. Neither side was listening to the other. They were just performing for an audience and waiting for someone else to solve their problem for them. Jake turned away from the window and looked at Daniel. His friend looked tired. They all looked tired these days. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for 200 years, and for most of that time they had been the ones doing the actual work. When trade routes needed protection, human ships patrolled them. When disputes needed mediation, human diplomats handled the negotiations. When colonies faced natural disasters, human aid ships arrived first and stayed longest. When pirates or raiders threatened Council space, human military forces drove them away. The other species contributed money and resources to the Council's general fund, but humans contributed blood and sweat and time. The viewing window suddenly lit up with a bright flash as one of the Velthoran delegates threw a ceremonial cup at a Crix representative. Security drones moved in quickly to separate the two species before an actual fight could break out. Jake sighed and took another drink of his terrible coffee. This was what humanity spent its resources protecting. This was what human soldiers died for. Spoiled children in adult bodies throwing tantrums because they could not have everything they wanted. The chamber doors opened and Ambassador Linda Hayes walked out, looking like she had aged 10 years in the past month. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup could not hide. She saw Jake and Daniel and walked over to join them. For a moment she just stood there breathing deeply like someone who had barely escaped drowning. Then she spoke in a quiet voice that contained more frustration than Jake had ever heard from her before. "They do not want solutions," she said. "They want us to choose sides so they can blame us when things go wrong. If we support the Veltheran, the Crix will claim we are biased toward empires and monarchies. If we support the Crix, the Velthoran will say we favor collective hives over individual rights. If we split the asteroid belt fairly, both sides will complain that they deserved more. We cannot win because they do not want us to win. They want someone to blame for their own failures. Daniel nodded slowly and looked back at the chaos visible through the viewing window. My fleet has been on standby for 6 weeks, he said. Every time we try to return to patrol duties, the Council extends our deployment. They are using us as a threat without actually wanting us to act. Meanwhile, 3 human colony worlds have requested military support for pirate raids, but I have no ships to send them. We are protecting aliens who hate us while our own people go undefended. Jake pulled out his datapad again and scrolled through the messages he had received over the past month. Requests from human colonies for aid and support. Requests from human trading companies for military escorts through dangerous space. Requests from human research stations for equipment and supplies. All denied because humanity's resources were tied up serving the Galactic Council. He showed the screen to Linda and Daniel, and they both read through the messages with growing anger in their eyes. Linda walked over to the viewing wall that showed the space beyond Station Harmony. Kisseth Prime hung below them like a purple and blue jewel surrounded by the darkness of space. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species floated in orbit conducting trade and diplomacy, and all the normal business of galactic civilization. It looked peaceful and orderly from a distance. Up close it was held together by human effort and human sacrifice. What if we just stopped? Linda asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them like something dangerous and forbidden. What if we stopped mediating their disputes and protecting their trade routes and rushing to save them every time they made stupid decisions? What if we just went home and let them figure things out for themselves? Daniel looked at her sharply. You mean withdraw from the Council completely? He asked. Linda turned to face them both. Her expression was serious and determined. I mean exactly that, she said. We have given the galaxy 200 years of service. We have bled and died and sacrificed our own people's needs to serve aliens who show us no gratitude and no respect. At what point does service become slavery? At what point do we say enough and walk away? Jake felt something shift inside his chest. It was a feeling of relief mixed with guilt, mixed with anger at himself for not thinking of this option sooner. He looked at Daniel and saw the same conflict playing across his friend's face. They had both dedicated their careers to serving the Galactic Council. They had both believed that humanity's role as peacekeeper and protector was noble and necessary. But standing here watching aliens throw cups at each other while human colonies went undefended made him question everything. Behind them, the council chamber erupted in another round of shouting as the Velthorin and Crick's delegations renewed their argument. The same argument they had been having for months. The same argument they would keep having until someone else solved it for them. Linda turned back to the window and watched the chaos with cold eyes. I am going to recommend withdrawal to the president, she said. We have tried everything else. Maybe it is time to let the galaxy grow up and learn to solve its own problems. Even if the lesson is painful, Jake and Daniel did not argue with her. They could not. Deep down, they both knew she was right. Humanity had tried to help by doing everything for the council species. All that had accomplished was making them dependent and entitled. Maybe the best help humanity could give now was to step back and let them stand on their own feet, even if they stumbled and fell in their process. The 3 humans stood together in silence and watched the alien delegations continue their pointless argument. Tomorrow, Linda would send her report to Earth. Within a week, the human government would make its decision. And then everything would change. The galaxy just did not know it yet. President Helen Carter sat at the head of the long conference table in Geneva and listened to the reports with her hands folded in front of her. The room was full of important people from every branch of human government and military. General Richard Blake was presenting the numbers, and every number made the situation look worse. 60% of humanity's military fleet was assigned to Council peacekeeping operations in alien space. 40% of the annual budget went to Council contributions and aid programs for species that never said thank you. Human colonies on the frontier had waiting lists 3 months long for basic medical supplies because production facilities were focused on making goods for Council member worlds. Helen had read Ambassador Linda Hayes's report 5 times before calling this meeting. Each time she read it, her anger grew hotter and more focused. Linda had laid out 200 years of human sacrifice in careful detail. Every war humans fought to protect alien trade routes. Every famine humans solved by shipping food across the galaxy. Every disease outbreak humans contained by sending medical teams into danger. Every territorial dispute humans mediated while being called biased by both sides. The report was 30 pages long, and by the end, Helen wanted to recall every human from council space immediately. But she was the president, and presidents did not make decisions based on anger. So she called this meeting and listened to everyone speak their piece before making her choice. General Richard Blake finished his military assessment and sat down. Admiral Patricia Foster stood up next to give the naval perspective. Her fleet had been stretched thin for 5 years running. Ships that should have been protecting human colonies were instead patrolling council borders. Crews that should have rotated home to see their families were extended on deployment, because the council kept finding new crises that required human intervention. "We are exhausted," Patricia said bluntly. "My captains report low morale and high stress across the entire fleet. We joined the military to protect humanity, not to be the private security force for aliens who treat us like servants. If we withdraw from council obligations, I can have ships back to protecting our own space within 2 months. We can actually fulfill our duty to our own people instead of neglecting them for others." Colonial Representative Susan Wright spoke next, and her voice shook with controlled fury. "Last month, the farming colony on New Dakota requested emergency relief ships for a crop blight that threatened to starve 15,000 people. We had the ships ready. We had the supplies loaded. Then the council requisitioned those same ships to transport decorations and entertainment equipment for a Velthoran trade festival. A festival. They took our emergency relief supplies so aliens could have a party while our people faced starvation. We eventually got supplies to New Dakota, but 3 weeks late, and 40 people died from malnutrition-related complications in the delay." Helen closed her eyes briefly. She had read about the New Dakota situation in the intelligence briefings, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that hurt. 40 people dead because humanity put alien festivals ahead of human lives. That was unacceptable. That was exactly the kind of choice that had to stop. Ambassador Linda Hayes was present by video link from Station Harmony. Her image appeared on the large screen at the end of the table. Helen asked her to describe the current situation at the council, and Linda did so in flat, professional tones that barely concealed her contempt. The Velthoran Crix dispute remained unresolved because both sides refused any compromise. The council had rejected all 14 human proposals for peaceful division of the asteroid belt. Now both sides were demanding humans choose a winner and enforce it militarily. When humanity refused, both species accused humans of being weak and unreliable allies. "They do not see us as partners," Linda said. "They see us as tools. We exist to solve their problems and take their blame when solutions are unpopular. I have been a diplomat for 20 years, and I have never been treated with such casual disrespect by supposed allies. They interrupt me during presentations. They dismiss our proposals without consideration. They make demands like we are servants rather than equals. And when I suggest they might try solving their own disputes, they look at me like I suggested something absurd." The medical representative, Dr. George Palmer, shared statistics about human health resources diverted to council worlds. Human hospitals on frontier colonies were understaffed because doctors and nurses volunteered for council medical missions that paid better and offered more prestige. Research funding that could cure human diseases was instead directed towards studying alien biology to help council species. Medical equipment was shipped to alien worlds while human clinics made do with outdated scanners and surgical tools. The trade representative, Lisa Montgomery, explained how human shipping companies were required to provide discounted rates to council members as part of the alliance agreement. This meant human traders operated at thin margins while alien competitors undercut them, using the very shipping lanes that human military forces protected. The economic impact was significant and growing worse each year. Education representative Kevin Torres described how human universities were pressured to accept alien students at reduced tuition, while qualified human applicants were turned away due to space limitations. The council called this cultural exchange, but it was really just another way aliens benefited from human generosity, without reciprocation. Helen listened to 2 hours of testimony, and every story was the same. Humans giving and aliens taking, humans sacrificing and aliens demanding more. The relationship was not partnership or alliance. It was exploitation dressed up in diplomatic language. Finally, she asked the question that mattered most. If we withdraw, what happens to the council species who genuinely need help? What about the smaller, peaceful species who depend on our protection? General Richard Blake answered carefully. Some species will struggle, he admitted, but struggling is how people learn and grow. We have enabled dependency for 200 years. The council species never developed their own peacekeeping forces because they could always call us. They never learned conflict resolution because we always mediated for them. They never built robust aid networks because we always arrived first with supplies. We thought we were helping, but we were actually preventing them from developing the capabilities they need to survive independently. Linda Hayes nodded on the screen. I have been thinking about this constantly, she said. There will be hardship when we leave. Some disputes will escalate into small conflicts. Some colonies will face shortages. Some species will suffer. But these are the natural consequences of their own choices and failures. We cannot protect them from reality forever. At some point, they must learn to stand alone, even if standing is difficult at first. Helen looked around the table at the faces of her advisors and representatives. She saw exhaustion and frustration, but also hope. Hope that humanity might finally put its own people first. Hope that the endless drain of resources might stop. Hope that human soldiers and doctors and diplomats might come home. She made her decision. We withdraw, she said quietly but firmly. Effective immediately, we begin recalling all human forces from council operations. We will give them 6 months' notice, which is more generous than they deserve. We will offer to help train their own peacekeeping forces and provide technical documentation for all the systems we have installed over the years. But we are done being the galaxy's unpaid security service. We are done sacrificing our people for aliens who show us nothing but contempt. Linda Hayes smiled on the screen. It was the first genuine smile Helen had seen from her in months. I will begin drafting the withdrawal notice, she said. Helen continued speaking as the plan took shape in her mind. We do this quietly and professionally. No angry speeches or dramatic gestures. We simply inform the council of our decision and begin the withdrawal process. We fulfill our existing contracts and commitments but take no new ones. We bring our people home in an orderly fashion. When the council complains, we remain polite but firm. This is not punishment or revenge. This is simply humanity choosing to prioritize its own citizens over aliens who take us for granted. The room filled with questions about logistics and timing. How quickly could ships be recalled? Which diplomatic posts should close first? What about human civilians living on council worlds? What about joint research projects and trade agreements? Helen appointed committees to handle each issue and gave them 48 hours to report back with detailed plans. General Richard Blake asked about military preparedness. If we recall the fleet, will we be vulnerable to attack from aggressive council species who might see withdrawal as weakness? Helen shook her head. We are not leaving ourselves defenseless. Ships will withdraw in stages to avoid creating gaps in our own defensive coverage. And frankly, any species stupid enough to attack us will learn very quickly why we were the council's peacekeepers. We never needed them. They needed us. The meeting continued for another hour as details were hammered out. Finally, Helen dismissed everyone except Linda Hayes, whose image remained on the screen. The two women looked at each other across the light years of distance between Geneva and Station Harmony. How do you think they will react? Helen asked. Linda considered the question carefully. Denial at first, she predicted. They will think we are bluffing or trying to negotiate better terms. When they realize we are serious, they will be angry. They will accuse us of abandonment and betrayal. Some will threaten sanctions or retaliation, though they have little leverage to actually hurt us. Eventually, desperation will set in as the consequences of our absence become clear. That is when things will get interesting. Helen nodded slowly. Good, she said. Let them learn the hard way that actions have consequences and that human patience has limits. Maybe after they spend a few years solving their own problems, they will understand what we gave them all these years. Linda signed off, and Helen sat alone in the conference room looking at the reports scattered across the table. Somewhere on those pages were the names of 40 humans who had died in the last month alone while serving council interests. 40 funerals, 40 families grieving, 40 lives spent protecting aliens who could not even be bothered to learn their names. No more, she said to the empty room. No more human blood for alien convenience. No more human sacrifice for alien ingratitude. She picked up her secure phone and gave the order. Within an hour, encrypted messages began transmitting to every human ship station and diplomatic post in council space. The orders were simple and clear. Pack up, come home. Do it quietly. The withdrawal had begun. Captain Daniel Cross stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour and read the orders that had just arrived through the secure military channel. He read them twice to make sure he understood correctly. Then he looked up at his crew and saw them all watching him with curious expressions. They knew something important had just happened, but they were waiting for him to tell them what. "We are going home," Daniel announced. Effective immediately, this battle group is withdrawn from Council operations and redeployed to human space. We leave in 48 hours. The bridge went silent for exactly 3 seconds, then erupted in cheers. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Kate Russell, actually hugged the helmsman. His chief engineer, Commander Paul Martinez, pumped his fist in the air. Even his normally stoic first officer, Commander Lisa Chen, smiled broadly. Daniel felt the same relief washing through him. After 7 weeks of sitting in orbit doing nothing while the Council argued they were finally free to go back to doing their actual jobs, he called a meeting of all department heads and explained the full situation. Humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council completely, not just military forces, but everything. Diplomats, aid workers, medical staff, researchers, everyone. It was the most significant shift in human policy in 200 years, and it was happening quietly, without fanfare or drama. "What about the civilians?" Paul asked. "We have thousands of human citizens living and working on Council worlds. They are being notified now," Daniel replied. "Those who want to leave will be given transport home. Those who want to stay can remain, but they will do so as private citizens without Council protection or support. Most contracts will be allowed to expire naturally." Over the next 2 days, the human battle group prepared for departure. Ships that had been on standby for weeks suddenly buzzed with activity as crews performed final systems checks and loaded supplies for the journey home. Daniel sent a formal notification to Station Harmony, informing them of his departure date and offering to coordinate the transition with whatever Council forces would be taking over patrol duties. The response he received 12 hours later was brief and dismissive. The Council would handle security arrangements without human assistance. Daniel smiled at that. They still thought humanity was bluffing. The day of departure arrived and Daniel gave the order to break orbit. 8 human warships powered up their engines and began moving away from Station Harmony in perfect formation. As they accelerated toward the jump point, Daniel looked back at the massive station one last time. He had spent 2 years of his life serving there. Now he was leaving and he felt nothing but relief. On Station Harmony, Ambassador Linda Hayes was preparing her own departure. She had submitted humanity's formal withdrawal notice to the Galactic Council 3 days earlier. The document was professional and courteous. It thanked the Council for 2 centuries of partnership and explained that humanity needed to prioritize its own citizens going forward. It offered 6 months of transition support and volunteered to help train Council peacekeeping forces. It proposed continuing trade and diplomatic relations on a bilateral basis with individual species. The Council's response had been insulting. Lord Castellan-Theverick sent a message calling humanity's withdrawal a childish tantrum. He said humans were simply overwhelmed by the complexity of galactic politics and needed time to mature. The Crix Queen sent an even more condescending message, suggesting humans were having an emotional breakdown and should reconsider before damaging their reputation. The Solarian delegation did not respond at all. "They think we are negotiating," Linda told Jake Morrison as they packed up the human diplomatic offices. "They genuinely cannot imagine that we would actually leave. They think if they ignore us or insult us, we will give up and stay. Then they are going to be very surprised," Jake replied. Linda scheduled one final meeting with the Council leadership to clarify humanity's position. She stood before the assembled representatives and spoke in clear, firm tones. "Humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council," she said. "This is not a negotiating position or a temporary measure. This is our final decision. We will fulfill all existing contracts and commitments, but we will accept no new obligations. Our military forces are returning to human space. Our aid programs are closing. Our diplomatic presence will be reduced to a single liaison officer for the next 6 months, then closed entirely." The Council chamber erupted in protests and accusations. The Velthoran called it betrayal. The Crix called it cowardice. A dozen other species shouted questions and demands. Linda waited for them to quiet down, then spoke again. "For 200 years, humanity has served this Council faithfully," she said. We have protected your trade routes, mediated your disputes, provided aid in your emergencies, and asked for little in return. In that time you have grown dependent on our service. You stopped developing your own peacekeeping capabilities because you could always call us. You stopped learning conflict resolution because we would always mediate. You stopped preparing for emergencies because we would always arrive with aid. This dependency is not healthy for you, and it is not fair to us. We are leaving so you can learn to stand on your own. You cannot just abandon us, a Silurian delegate protested. What about our security agreements? Those agreements required mutual respect and partnership, Linda replied. You have shown us neither. You may continue security arrangements by hiring human military contractors at market rates, or you may develop your own forces. The choice is yours. She left the council chamber and did not look back. Within a week, the human diplomatic compound on Station Harmony was empty, except for one junior officer who remained as the promised liaison. Linda boarded a transport ship bound for Earth with Jake and 30 other human diplomats. As the ship pulled away from the station, she felt 200 years of weight lift from her shoulders. The withdrawal played out across the galaxy in similar fashion. Human military fleets stationed at border posts and trade nexuses quietly redeployed to human space. The withdrawal was staggered to avoid creating dangerous power vacuums, but it was steady and irreversible. Patrol routes that humans had guarded for decades were left unprotected. Defense platforms that humans had maintained went silent. Human aid stations began closing their doors. The medical facility on Torvin Station had treated patients from 20 different species free of charge for 50 years. When it closed, the chief administrator, Dr. Alan Foster, offered to transfer all patients to council-run facilities and donate the equipment at cost. The local council representative refused the equipment, claiming they could build better facilities themselves. 3 months later, the same representative would beg Alan to come back, but by then he was home on Earth treating human patients. On the joint colony world of Tarsus 6, Administrator Peter Grant oversaw the complicated process of extracting human presence from infrastructure they had built and maintained for 50 years. Humans and Velthoran had shared this world since its founding, but humans had done most of the actual work. The power grid was human-designed. The water purification systems were human-built. The medical center was human-staffed. The communication network was human-maintained. Peter called a meeting with the Velthoran colonial leadership and explained the situation. Humanity is leaving, he said. We are offering to sell you all the infrastructure we built at cost. We will provide complete technical documentation and offer short-term contracts to train your people in maintenance and operation. After that, you are on your own. The Velthoran administrator Kelvara looked shocked. But we do not have anyone trained to maintain these systems, she protested. What will we do without your engineers? You will figure it out, Peter replied. We have offered training. We have provided manuals. Whether you accept our help or not is your choice, but we are leaving either way. But the power grid alone requires specialized knowledge, Kelvara argued. It could take years to train our people. Then you should start immediately, Peter suggested. Or you can pay human contractors to maintain it for you. But the days of free human labor are over. The Velthoran leadership held an emergency meeting and decided to refuse the infrastructure purchase out of pride. They believed they could maintain the systems themselves without human help or training. Peter documented their refusal carefully, then proceeded with the withdrawal. Human technicians packed up their personal tools and equipment. Man engineers copied all the technical data onto portable drives and offered them one final time to the Velthoran administrators. Most were refused. On his last day, Peter walked through the colony settlement and felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness because he had spent 10 years building this place into something functional and beautiful. Satisfaction because he was finally free to go home and work on human projects instead. A young Velthoran named Thelvas approached him as he prepared to board the transport ship. You are really leaving, she asked. Even though we need you. Peter looked at her tired face and saw genuine concern rather than entitled demanding. Yes, we are leaving, he said more gently. But not because we want to hurt you. We are leaving because staying was hurting us. Our own colonies need the resources we have been spending here. Our own people need the help we have been giving you. This was not an easy choice, but it was necessary. What if we fail without you, Thelvas asked quietly. Then you will learn from failure and do better next time, Peter replied. That is how growth works. We cannot protect you from every consequence forever. Eventually, you have to learn to solve your own problems. He boarded the transport and watched through the viewport as Tarsus 6 shrank into the distance. In 6 months, the colony would face a harsh winter without properly maintained power systems. In a year, they would struggle with water quality issues. But eventually they would learn. They would adapt. They would become self-sufficient because they would have no other choice. Across council space, the same pattern repeated itself. Humans withdrew quietly and professionally. They offered assistance and training that was mostly refused out of pride. They packed up their equipment and took what was theirs and left the rest. Some council species begged them to stay. Others insisted they did not need human help anyway. Most did not realize yet how much they were about to lose. The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson, and humanity was finally going home 6 months after humanity began its withdrawal. The first real consequences started to appear. The Velthoran-Crix dispute over the Talos asteroid belt had been simmering for years, with human mediators keeping it from boiling over. Now there were no human mediators and no human warships hovering nearby as a deterrent. Both sides felt emboldened to push their claims more aggressively. It started with a Crix mining ship entering a sector the Velthoran considered their territory. A Velthoran patrol corvette fired warning shots. The Crix ship ignored the warnings and continued mining operations. The Velthoran corvette disabled the mining ship's engines and attempted to board it. 3 Crix vessels arrived as reinforcement and a brief firefight erupted. 2 Velthoran ships were damaged and 1 Crix vessel was destroyed. 14 Crix drones died in the explosion. Lord Castellan Thevrix demanded an emergency council session to condemn Crix aggression. The Crix Queen demanded her own emergency session to condemn Velthoran piracy. Both sessions were scheduled and both devolved into shouting matches within minutes, without human mediators present, to guide the discussion toward productive solutions. Every debate became an exercise in blame and accusation. The Silurian delegate tried to propose a compromise that gave each side partial access to the disputed sectors. The Velthoran representative interrupted her presentation 3 times to make points about ancient territorial claims. The Crix representative refused to even acknowledge the proposal, without a formal apology for the destroyed mining ship. By the end of the 4-hour session, nothing had been resolved, and both sides were more entrenched in their positions. Over the next month, the skirmishes in the asteroid belt escalated. More ships on both sides were damaged or destroyed. Mining operations became impossible as both species spent their resources on military patrols instead of resource extraction. Trade routes near the disputed zone became dangerous as trigger-happy captains from both sides fired on any vessel they considered suspicious. The council held 7 more emergency sessions. Every single one ended in deadlock. The problem was obvious to everyone. For 200 years, the council had relied on human translators who understood the cultural nuances of every species. They had relied on human mediators who could find common ground between opposing positions. They had relied on human military forces whose presence alone prevented conflicts from escalating. Now all of that was gone and the council could not function without it. Some species tried to step into the mediator role but failed quickly. The Aquarian delegate attempted to negotiate between the Velthoran and Crix, but gave up after both sides accused her of bias. The Drexian representative proposed bringing in professional arbitrators, but could not get agreement on who would pay for them. The council had no peacekeeping force to deploy because they had always relied on human military units. Attempts to assemble a combined fleet from member species failed spectacularly. The Velthoran refused to serve under Crix command. The Kree would not share intelligence with the Silurians due to old grievances. The Aquarians insisted on non-lethal weapons, only which the Drexians found ridiculous. Every species had different rules of engagement and different strategic priorities. Coordinating them was impossible without a neutral party everyone trusted, and the only neutral party everyone had trusted was humanity. While the Council struggled with the Velthoran-Crix situation, other problems emerged. Pirate attacks increased by 300% across Council space. The Orion trade route had been the safest commercial path in the galaxy, thanks to constant human naval patrols. Now the patrols were gone and pirates moved in eagerly. Merchant vessels began traveling in convoys for safety, but even that was not enough. Insurance rates for shipping skyrocketed. Some routes became so dangerous that companies simply stopped using them. The economic impact rippled through Council space. Goods that moved freely before now faced delays and shortages. Prices increased as shipping costs went up. Smaller companies went bankrupt trying to pay the new insurance premiums. Trade volume dropped by 40% in 3 months. On Tarsus 6, the consequences of refusing human help became brutally clear. Winter arrived and the fusion reactors that powered the colony began showing signs of stress. The Velthoran technicians who had taken over maintenance did not fully understand the systems despite the technical manuals Peter Grant had left behind. They made small errors that compounded over time. In the coldest week of winter, one reactor went offline completely. The colony lost power to half its residential sectors. Temperatures inside habitation domes dropped below freezing. Emergency shelters were overcrowded and undersupplied. The Velthoran colonial government sent desperate messages to the council requesting aid. The council voted to send a relief convoy, but organizing it took 3 weeks because no one could agree on which species should contribute what resources. By the time the relief supplies arrived, 12 Velthoran colonists had died from hypothermia. Another 40 were hospitalized with cold-related injuries. The reactor was eventually repaired by an emergency team that included one retired human engineer, who charged triple rates for coming out of retirement. He fixed the immediate problem in 2 days, then spent another week showing the Velthoran technicians what they had done wrong. You had the manuals, he told them bluntly. You had the training offers. You refused both because you thought you knew better. This is what pride costs. Similar situations developed on other worlds where humans had maintained critical infrastructure. A water purification system on a Silurian colony world failed because no one had replaced the filtration membranes on schedule. 3,000 colonists got sick from contaminated water before the problem was identified and fixed. A communication relay network serving 20 systems went down for 4 days because the Aquarian technicians who took it over did not understand the diagnostic software. Medical crises emerged on stations where human doctors and human medical technology had provided the bulk of health care. A virus outbreak on Port Nova Station overwhelmed the local medical staff, who were trained in only 3 species biology. Human doctors had routinely treated 15 different species using their broad medical knowledge and advanced diagnostic equipment. Without them, the outbreak killed 40 patients who could have been saved. The council began to understand what they had lost, but understanding did not lead to solutions. Some species called for humanity to be sanctioned for abandonment, but sanction them with what? Humanity had never depended on the council for anything essential. They were net contributors, not takers. Cutting trade with Earth would hurt council economies far more than human ones. Other species suggested sending delegations to Earth to negotiate humanity's return. Several delegations did travel to Geneva, and all received the same polite, firm response from President Helen Carter. Humanity was willing to engage in fair trade agreements with individual species. Humanity was willing to negotiate mutual defense pacts on equitable terms. Humanity was willing to sell military and medical services at market rates. But humanity was done serving as the council's unpaid problem solvers. We gave you 2 centuries of service, Helen told one delegation. We bled and died for you. We sacrificed our own people's needs to prioritize yours, and you treated us like servants and blamed us when we could not fix every problem instantly. We are not coming back to that relationship. If you want our help, you will pay for it fairly and treat us with respect. Otherwise, you will learn to solve your own problems. The delegations returned home empty-handed. Back in council space, the situation continued deteriorating. The Velthoran-Kree conflict expanded as neighboring species were drawn in by old alliances and opportunistic land grabs. The Drexians saw weakness and seized 3 disputed border worlds from the Aquarians. The Silurians formed a defensive pact with an aggressive species called the Torgathi, which alarmed everyone else and created new tensions. Trade routes remained dangerous and economic depression spread through council territories. Species that had built their economies assuming human protection would always be available faced harsh recessions. Unemployment rose. Political instability followed. Governments fell as angry populations demanded solutions their leaders could not provide. Ambassador Linda Hayes watched the reports from her new office on Earth. She had been promoted to Director of Interstellar Relations and spent her days handling requests from council species seeking bilateral agreements with humanity. The requests came in constantly now. Everyone wanted deals. Everyone wanted help. Everyone suddenly understood that what they had taken for granted was actually valuable. We are not refusing them help, she told her staff during a morning briefing. We are just charging fair prices and insisting on respectful treatment. The ones who accept those terms get good agreements. The ones who still think they can demand our service for free get nothing. Will they ever figure it out?" one of her junior diplomats asked. Linda looked at the screen showing the latest crisis reports from Council Space. "Eventually," she said, "it will get worse before it gets better. Some species will suffer more than others. Some will learn faster. But they will learn because they have no other choice. We removed the safety net and now they have to learn to walk on their own even if they fall a few times." First, she thought about Lord Castellan Thebrix and his condescending message calling humanity's withdrawal a childish tantrum. She wondered if he still felt that way watching his empire slide toward war with the Crix. She thought about the Crix queen who had suggested humans were having an emotional breakdown. She wondered if the queen still believed that while her ships burned in pointless skirmishes, the galaxy was learning a painful lesson about taking things for granted. Humanity was not there to watch or to gloat. They were home focusing on their own people and letting the council species face the natural consequences of their own choices. It was harsh, but it was fair, and fairness sometimes hurt. 2 years after humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council, the galaxy looked very different. The Velthoran-Creeks War had finally ended not because either side won, but because both sides were too exhausted to continue fighting. 18 months of combat had drained their military resources and devastated their economies. The treaty they signed without human mediation satisfied neither party and left bitter feelings that would probably spark another conflict within a generation. But for now, there was peace simply because no one had the strength to keep fighting. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. Attendance at council sessions had dropped as species lost faith in the institution's ability to solve problems. Some smaller species had withdrawn entirely and formed regional alliances instead. The council's authority had crumbled along with its relevance. Without human enforcement, there was no way to make member species follow council decisions they disagreed with. But not everything that happened was bad. Some species had learned from the painful lessons and started making real changes. The Silurians had been among the first to approach Earth with honest humility. Their delegate was a young diplomat named Velshara, who came to Geneva without the arrogance that had characterized previous council representatives. She sat across from Ambassador Linda Hayes and spoke plainly about her people's mistakes. "We took you for granted," Velshara said. "We assumed your generosity would last forever, and your patience was infinite. We demanded help as if it was owed to us rather than given freely. We were wrong, and we have paid terribly for that mistake. Our colonies struggled without your infrastructure support. Our economy suffered without your trade route protection. We lost people who could have been saved if we had maintained our own medical capabilities instead of depending on yours." Linda listened carefully and appreciated the honesty. "What do you want from us now?" she asked. "A fair partnership," Velshara replied. "Not servants or saviors, but partners. We need help rebuilding our peacekeeping capabilities. We need training on conflict resolution and infrastructure maintenance. We need your expertise, but we are prepared to pay fairly for it and to contribute equally to joint projects. We want to build a relationship of mutual respect, not dependency." Over the following months, humanity and the Silurians negotiated a mutual defense treaty that became a model for other agreements. The Silurians paid for human military advisors to train their own peacekeeping forces. They hired human engineers at market rates to teach infrastructure maintenance. They established fair trade agreements that benefited both species equally. Most importantly, they treated human representatives with genuine respect as equals, rather than as tools to be used. Other species watched, and some followed the Silurian example. The Aquarians negotiated a similar agreement. The Drexians approached Earth seeking technology licenses they were willing to pay for properly. Even some Velthoran colonies made separate deals with humanity after their imperial government proved too proud to do so. But some species refused to adapt. Lord Castellan Thevrix still ruled the Velthoran Empire, and still blamed humanity for abandoning the galaxy in its time of need. He sent angry messages to Earth demanding that humans return to their council duties. He threatened sanctions and military action, though everyone knew these were empty threats. The Velthoran military was still recovering from the war with the Crix, and posed no real danger to human space. President Helen Carter responded to one of his messages with patience she did not really feel. "Lord Castellan, we have explained our position many times," she wrote. Humanity served the Council faithfully for 200 years. We were treated as servants, not partners. We were blamed for problems we did not create while solving crises that were not our responsibility. We left because the relationship was unfair and unhealthy. We remain willing to negotiate individual agreements with your empire on equitable terms, but we will not return to servitude no matter how much you demand it. Thevrix never responded to that message. His pride would not allow him to negotiate on equal terms with beings he still considered beneath him. The Velthoran Empire continued its slow decline while the Velthoran colonies that had made separate deals with humanity prospered. The contrast was obvious to everyone except Thevrix himself. On Tarsus VI, the colony that had refused human help 2 years earlier had changed dramatically. After the winter disaster that killed 12 colonists, the survivors had learned harsh lessons. They hired human contractors to properly train their technicians. They studied the technical manuals they had previously ignored. They built up their own expertise slowly and painfully through trial and error. Administrator Kelvara, who had once protested humanity's departure, now ran a colony that was mostly self-sufficient. Peter Grant visited Tarsus VI on a consulting contract and barely recognized the place. The Velthoran colonists had adapted and grown. They maintained their own power systems competently now. They had trained doctors and engineers and technicians. They still hired human consultants for complex problems, but they were partners in the work, not helpless dependents. You were right to leave, Kelvara told Peter over dinner. We were angry at first. We thought you were cruel to abandon us, but forcing us to stand on our own was the greatest gift you could have given us. We are stronger now than we ever were when you did everything for us. Peter felt satisfaction hearing those words. This was what humanity had hoped would happen. Not the suffering and struggle, but the growth that came from it. Species learning to solve their own problems and becoming stronger in the process. The pirate situation had also improved, though not through council action. Several species had banded together to form regional security pacts and hired human military contractors to train their combined fleets. These regional forces were not as effective as human patrols had been, but they were adequate and improving steadily. Trade routes were safer now than they had been a year ago, though. Still more dangerous than during the time of human protection. Admiral Daniel Cross now commanded the human home fleet and occasionally led joint training exercises with allied species. He took a small battle group to participate in anti-piracy operations with a Silurian Aquarian task force. The exercise was rough around the edges with communication problems and coordination issues, but it mostly worked. The Allied fleet successfully cleared out a pirate base that had been operating for 6 months. After the operation, the Silurian fleet commander sent Daniel a message of thanks. "A year ago we could not have done this," she wrote. "We would have called for human help and waited for you to solve our problem. Now we solved it ourselves with you as partners, not saviors. It feels better this way." Daniel shared that message with his officers and saw them nodding in agreement. This was what real cooperation looked like. Not one species doing all the work while others watched, but genuine partnership where everyone contributed and everyone benefited. Back on Earth, President Helen Carter reviewed reports from across human space and allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. Human colonies were thriving now that resources were no longer diverted to council obligations. The infrastructure projects that had been delayed for decades were finally being completed. New schools and hospitals opened on frontier worlds. Research programs that had been underfunded now received proper support. The human economy was stronger than it had been in 50 years. Some historians and political analysts criticized the withdrawal, calling it selfish or short-sighted. They pointed to the suffering that had occurred in council space and blamed humanity for not preventing it. Helen addressed these criticisms in a speech at the United Earth Assembly. "We did not cause the council's problems," she said. "We spent 200 years preventing them from facing the natural consequences of their own choices. When we left, they had to finally deal with those consequences. Yes, there was suffering. Yes, there were deaths. But those deaths were not our responsibility. We are not the guardians of the galaxy. We are not responsible for protecting every species from their own mistakes. We have a responsibility to our own people first, and we failed that responsibility for too long while serving others who treated us with contempt." She paused and looked out at the assembled representatives. "Some species have learned and grown from this experience," she continued. "They have become stronger and more self-reliant. They treat us with respect now because they understand what we gave them and what it cost us. Those species are our true allies, and we are building good relationships with them. Other species remain bitter and entitled. They still believe we owed them our service. Those species will continue to struggle until they learn that partnership requires mutual respect. The speech was controversial, but most humans agreed with it. They had seen their own colonies neglected while resources went to aliens. They had lost family members who died protecting council trade routes. They knew the old relationship had been unfair, and they supported the decision to end it. Ambassador Linda Hayes sat in her office in Geneva and thought about how much had changed. 2 years ago, she had stood in the council chambers being lectured by Lord Castellan-Thevrix about humanity's obligations. Now she negotiated treaties with species who came to Earth as equals seeking fair agreements. The difference was profound and satisfying. Her assistant brought in another request from a council species seeking a bilateral agreement. This one was from a small peaceful species called the Yarvani, who had never been arrogant or demanding. They had simply been caught up in the council's dysfunction and suffered for it. Linda read their proposal and found it reasonable and fair. She approved opening negotiations. This is how it should have been from the beginning, she thought. Individual agreements between species who respected each other. Not a bloated council where entitled species made demands while contributing nothing. She looked out her window at the city below. Humans going about their lives, working and building and creating without the burden of supporting an ungrateful galaxy. This was what they had fought for. This was what the withdrawal had been about. Not revenge or spite, but simply choosing to prioritize their own people for once. Across the galaxy, the new reality continued to settle in. Some species adapted and grew stronger. Some species struggled and blamed others for their failures. Trade and cooperation continued, but on different terms. The galaxy was more fractured now, with regional alliances replacing the unified council structure. Some called it chaos. Others called it natural evolution. On a human patrol ship near the edge of explored space, Commander Jake Morrison trained a group of young cadets. One of them asked the question that everyone asked eventually. "Did we do the right thing by withdrawing, sir?" Jake looked at the young faces watching him and chose his words carefully. "We did the necessary thing," he said. "For 200 years we tried to help by doing everything for them. We learned the hard way that true help is not doing things for people. True help is teaching them to do things for themselves. It was a painful lesson for everyone, but it was necessary." He gestured toward the viewport showing the stars beyond. "The galaxy is still there," he continued, "still chaotic and still struggling, but no longer dependent on one species to solve all its problems. The council species are learning to stand on their own. Some are learning faster than others. Some may never learn. But that is their choice and their responsibility, not ours." "What about our responsibility?" the cadet asked. "Do we not have a responsibility to help those weaker than us?" "We have a responsibility to help when asked and when the help is genuine partnership," Jake replied. "We have a responsibility to protect our allies when they face threats too large to handle alone. But we do not have a responsibility to sacrifice our own people's well-being, to serve others who treat us with disrespect. We can be helpful without being servants. We can be generous without being exploited." The cadets nodded, understanding even if they did not fully agree. They would form their own opinions as they gained experience. That was how it should be. Each generation questioning the choices of the previous one and making their own decisions about what was right. The humans had withdrawn quietly, and in the silence they left. Behind the galaxy had finally learned to stand on its own. Not perfectly and not without pain, but it was standing. And humanity, watching from a respectful distance, was ready to help as partners whenever asked. But the days of servitude were over and they would never return.